everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics. Today's Solidarity Fridays. This is your April 30 issue. It's just me and Kyle today. Michelle had some power issues, but she'll be back real soon. How you doing today, Kyle?
Pretty good, Joe. How are you doing today?
Lovely. Had a few runs on the mountain. It was really nice. 6 inches overnight on top of very firm ice. So,
you guys are still open out there. Nice.
Oh yeah, we might be open till the end of May. Yeah. This is one of my most personal incentives around climate change is keeping the season really big. But it also has implications for fires and all sorts of stuff about living in Colorado. We had a really rough summer last year with all the fires. So, fire plus COVID was quite the time.
Climate change is one reason why I didn't get involved in the ski industry. For those that don't know, I actually, before going to get my transpersonal psychology degree, I went out to Colorado to look at a program in mountain operations, and I was reading in some of the news that some banks were like being cautious about giving loans out to ski resorts due to the impending, consequences of climate change and how that could really disrupt the ski industry. So I was like, maybe there's no security in that long term.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's always been a troubled industry. It's been really hard for them to make money, but some groups are figuring it out. It's kind of nice to see, less resorts failing. Because for a period there, it was like, a few resorts would have to close every single year at least, swapping ownership and trying their best. Yeah. But, whatever. It's getting to that point, and climate is going to be a big impact there. Colorado's going to be a very different place in 20 years. Already is a really different place from 5 years ago. So anyway, digging in. Well, before we dig in, let's talk navigating psychedelics. So May 20, we kick off our next cohort. Both cohorts, we are groups. We've got I only know my time zone, noon and 5 Mountain time zone. I guess that's 2 and 7 Eastern. And that works well for some folks in the UK, and we actually have had a lot of folks from Australia join as well. So don't be afraid of the time zone. We can make it work, I promise. And you can learn more at Psychedelic Education Center. If the live one isn't really for you, we've got the pre-recorded independent learner package available there as well, and some few other good courses. Kyle, can you tell us about the serotonergic psychedelics course that's coming up soon?
Yeah, so this is going to be a live webinar on Tuesday, May 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will run for an hour and a half. And this will be presented by Dr. Melanie Pincus. So she ran a webinar in the past where she's created a series called Mind Bending, Mind Mending, and we're looking at the different effects of psychedelics on the brain. So the last one was on ketamine, and this one will be on the serotonergic psychedelics, or the classical tryptamine psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, and DMT. It's CE approved. So if you're looking for 1.5 CE credits, that will be approved. And it's just for the live portion. There won't be any CE credits for replay. So you can sign up. You go to psychedelicstoday.com, go click the little events tab or hover over it, and you'll see the series there. And if you follow us on Instagram, you can click the link in our bio there, and there's a picture of the series there, and that will bring you to our Psychedelics Today shop, and you can purchase your ticket. It's $15 and $45 for CE credits. I forget, something like that. But yeah, it should be fun. People really, really enjoyed the ketamine series. Got a lot of great feedback on that, and just super pumped to be working with Dr. Pincus on this one again.
Awesome. And if someone misses it, will it be recorded?
We will probably have a limited replay for the people that pay. We'll probably only keep it up for a week or so, and then the idea is we'll run it again live. So if you miss it, just stay tuned. We'll probably run it again live, or we'll have a course in the future that will be the material.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So digging into some news, this Business Wire press release titled Cybin Selects Alcohol Use Disorder Indication for Psychedelic Molecule CYB003. Now, first reaction to the title, okay, there's a new molecule. You would want to assume it was a derivative of psilocybin, but it's, not obvious by the title of the article. But they say it is a deuterated psychedelic tryptamine. I didn't look up the deuterated word yet. Did you?
I had to look it up.
To replace one or more hydrogen atoms in a molecule with deuterium. Yeah. That's fascinating. So that's a really neat way of modifying molecules to create new analogs. So fascinating.
Yep.
Cool. And it's nice to see that a company is actually going to address alcohol use disorder. Obviously a big deal in America, worldwide even. And there's secondary issues related to alcohol use disorder, right? Like, I'm sure, Kyle, you've had some friends die from car crashes related to alcohol. I have too.
Definitely.
It's horrible. Especially when you're young, right? Like, I remember somebody dying before I even went to college, alcohol-related incident. It's horrible. Yeah, and not to mention, like, spreading of AIDS and, like, other diseases. Think about the time of COVID, too. Like, people with alcohol use disorder are probably more likely to be in a bar throughout COVID than, perhaps sober people or people without alcohol use disorder. So, there's reasons to look at this, and I've been personally very affected by alcohol use disorder in my family life. So I've seen why this is necessary. And I hope you have too out there, listeners. Yeah, so they're working it through the system. They've got a IND, so investigation on new drug designation, I think, or they're applying for the IND. Is that right? I have to pull it up. So Cybin is confident, here's a quote, Cybin is confident that its proprietary deuterated CYB003 new chemical entity could be an ideal investigational new drug, IND, candidate for a future AUD clinical trial once further preclinical data has been collected. So they've set up this molecule to work it through the whole system. So it'll probably be a traditional, pharma project. It might take years, which drugs take years getting through the FDA often. So, stay tuned. Like, we're not in human trials yet, but preclinical trials don't take super duper long from what I understand. So, yeah, stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting thing. Did you see anything in there that was special, Kyle?
No, not so much. Exciting that they're working on a new compound. And, they also kind of pointing to the increase of alcohol use during the pandemic. So, just kind of stressing, we need to look for new treatments and, things as mental health need increases. And yeah, just rooting for this company. Our friend and colleague Brett is a part of the team here, so I feel like they'll probably end up doing some good things.
I always forget.
I always confuse SciBio and Cybin for some reason.
Yeah, it'll happen. So we'll have a link to this press release in the show notes, so check it out if you want to. Next up here, Hopkins is looking for participants in an Alzheimer's trial. So here's the title. Psilocybin is being studied as a potential aid for depression in early Alzheimer's disease. Interesting. So if you've got a diagnosis, you're feeling depressed, you might be able to get into this study if that's of interest. Alzheimer's is... correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. Like I might be, and listeners, please correct me too. I think Alzheimer's is one of the few things where you can get brain scans done and have a positive diagnosis, like based on the brain scan for Alzheimer's. which because there's like all these amyloid plaques and like tau proteins like blocking stuff and like kind of looking like substantial damage from what I understand. So like that's one of the more interesting things around brain imaging, right? Like how many diseases are actually identifiable.
Right.
Yeah. Like lesions, of course, but anyway, mild cognitive impairment from Alzheimer's can be really stressful. So it's kind of nice to see that. People working on it, Albert Garcia Romu, PhD, and Paul Rosenberg, MD. Those are the PIs. So we'll have a link to this if you want to check it out, learn more. I suspect, there could be a possibility of helping decrease the progress of Alzheimer's on the brain. I think there are people looking at this with ibogaine as well. Not that long
ayahuasca,
ago.
I thought there was some stuff with ayahuasca and Alzheimer's. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah. And, it makes sense that we would want to look at that, right? I recently read this book and sent it to my parents, too. What the hell is the name of the book? So it's something about reversing Alzheimer's, and this doctor came up with this concept of a cognoscopy. So, like, at a certain age, you get a colonoscopy, right? So, like, at a certain age, you should get a cognoscopy just to see, like, where you're at. And it'll check, like, certain genetic markers, biomarkers, your health in general, and say, like, okay, like, you're probably good to roll for a while. You follow these protocols, you're going to do okay. And, a lot of it comes down to our lifestyle choices. They suggest a very specific diet and very specific spacing between feed times and sleep, like 3 to 5 hours. I think after you eat, it's okay to go to sleep. But a lot of us will eat and go right to bed, right?
Right.
And this is something about like the body resting. It's able to clean things up in the body. If it doesn't have more inputs. I think this is why fasting is getting a lot of attention these days. Similar concept.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, tell your friends about this study, everybody. This is going to be an interesting one. I can't wait to see. Again, it's for depression. It's not for the Alzheimer's itself. So,
right.
Check it out.
Yeah, there was something back in what is this here? September 2020. There's a paper exploring DMT for neurogenesis, and so maybe looking at that for Alzheimer's, new neuron growth, neural pathways being made, what did it say here? This there's a quote here. This is the New York Post, just really quick. This is the headline: ayahuasca tea could be a breakthrough treatment for Alzheimer's. So there's a quote here. The challenge is to activate our dormant capacity to form new neurons and thus replace the neurons that die as a result of the disease. The study shows that DMT is capable of activating neural stem cells and forming new neurons. And that was Lopez from one of the co-authors of this paper here.
Interesting.
So, okay. Yeah, I think there's potentiality here, and exciting. I think we need to do more research. And yeah, I mean, Alzheimer's and dementia, it's a terrible disease. I know people that, have been through it with their family members, and it just sounds brutal. So be nice to be able to explore this and understand, maybe are we able to create new neurons with psychedelics, and could that help to promote maybe healing in there. It's interesting that Hopkins is looking at depression, so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that.
Right. This reminds me of I was listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast just because he had the one of the leads from the UCSF psychedelic group, a Neuroscape, I guess, group, and they developed software called NeuroRacer that allowed like 60-year-old brains, and it went through the whole FDA de novo like approval process. It is an approved software, and it treats cognitive decline, age-related cognitive decline, and it's really interesting, suggesting that, people at age 60 could return to having the cognition of a 20-year-old through using this game. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. So I think software plus drugs are really promising, probably also going to require some substantial lifestyle changes.
Of course.
So we'll see. Yeah. Now some other really great news. New nonprofit, Porta Sophia, portasophia.org, has developed a psychedelic prior art library. They're a nonprofit, created 4 patent reviewers around the world to help them find relevant prior art in the field of psychedelics. So it's got a simple search interface to look through literature, previous patents, historical archives, internet forums, and more, so that people can see, like, is this actually, this company X's invention? Because companies often have no shame about what they'll patent, even if it was somebody else's idea. So we have to really watch that. And it's going to be a really interesting project. And I have hope, that this will actually protect the commons. The commons needs protection.
Yeah.
You familiar with this idea of the tragedy of the commons, Kyle?
I don't think so, no. What is that?
It's like a economic idea. So say, for example, everybody's got like 2 or 3 personal cows, like say a few hundred years back, and there's a few cow herders just like cruising around these fields somewhere, and everybody like has public property, right? And it's not like your own private field. So it's shared, and people want to, at first you become kind of a steward of it, and you're like, oh, cool, this is nice. But all of a sudden, like, somebody starts to overuse it and like take more and more and more. And at a certain point, everybody else starts taking more and more and more. So there's like nothing left in the commons for everybody to share. So it's, I believe I did not butcher it, but that has a pretty clean, pathway for analogy in the psychedelic space. So, let's watch it, learn about the tragedy of the commons, and let's be good stewards of the commons. And I was really excited about this idea of companies kind of teaming up and having kind of like collective pools. Like some of your own IP is like personal, but some of it's kind of like shared. So that it's like, not anti-competitive. Like it's scary seeing the businesses come in, but we've got to realize like this is the way to get these treatments to many millions of people.
Yeah.
And it feels uncomfortable because it's so different, and these are kind of different people coming in that we're not used to dealing with. So yeah, how do we figure this thing out?
It's a weird balance, right? Because I feel like part of like, I guess like the psychedelic ethos is like really trying to shift the current paradigm, and like what happens when the current paradigm like comes in. I mean, obviously that's what we live in, right? So it's like, how do you really shift that? But I guess like, how could we shift to more cooperative actions versus like, competition all the time?
I was talking to this wild hippie last night. Spent a lot of time living in the woods, and his line was, "We don't have to like, right action. Like we might reframe right action as being like, how can we do like the least amount of harm to others when we make decisions? Like, is this like going to explicitly like hurt this person when I make this decision? Like, if no, cool. If yes, like maybe hit the pause button." So it was an interesting frame. It's like, yeah, that's like a very different baseline, because a lot of decisions these days are made specifically to harm folks.
Or not even thinking about the harm that's going to come out of it, right?
Right.
And I guess that kind of comes back to that, like, 7th-generation thinking. Like, are my actions going to cause, a big impact for, the generations to come?
I think about that a lot.
And I don't know. Yeah, I think about it a lot too. And I think maybe a lot of business doesn't think about it because it's very short-term oriented, how to make the most in the short-term gains versus like, all right, how is this really going to impact my, children's grandchildren. You know, it's we need to start thinking a little bit longer term at times, even though I always kind of come back to like thinking about like reincarnation. You know, if you believe it, sometimes I do, sometimes I wonder, you know, maybe other theories, but it's like, you know, if reincarnation's real, do you want to kind of create the cesspool to come back to? My answer would be no. I hope we would, you know, take care of the things around us to create a nice world to come back to. It'd really suck to create a hellscape to come back to. So, you know, how do we maybe have that vision moving forward, creating a world that we would want to come back to?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, you know, like that's a great way to frame it too. But it's like, you know, you have family that's going to be alive in probably 80 years. So like, what on earth are you doing? And why are you doing it that way when so many people could get so hurt and suffer so much? So, you know, this is not just in the psychedelic space. Like the psychedelic space is interesting. And we've talked about this endlessly, right? Like, you know, MAPS has done a great thing. They've brought it really far. They required a lot of, you know, nonprofit dollars to get this far. And now private capital is able to do essentially what they've been doing in just a short number of years.
Jeez, yeah.
So do we want, like, how many people should suffer so that the economics look appropriate? You know, to us as kind of radicals in the space, maybe, or radicals relative to the mainstream. So like, it's a complicated deal, but we've got to really think about it. Yeah. So I'm all for it. And again, like, you know, companies, just please try to have a little bit of compassion for those of us out here in the field, you know, been here for a while. And, yeah, just please, to the best of your ability, play nice. We'll try. I'll personally try to play nice till I see something. You know what? This is actually a good tangent, together. Kyle. So I was listening to Psychedelic Salon with Leonard Pickard, and he's the gentleman that was recently released after 20 years in max security prison for LSD manufacture. First, most interesting thing, he got to spend a year with Ross Ulrich, the guy that made the Silk Road.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was really fascinating. I might actually try to strike up some conversation with Ross in the near future. I think that would be nice. And then the other thing, you know, he seems like a really beautiful soul. Like 20 years of incarceration will really change somebody. So he, you know, spent years reading all the classics from, you know, the English canon, and eventually wrote a book, like a nearly 700-page book, Rosa Paracelsus, talking in, you know, it's a pseudo-autobiographical text, probably kind of fictionalized here and there, so it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. This is all based on how his court case went down. Beautifully done. Apparently it's like poetry prose. It's like, imagine like Victorian literature. And the next one is near the end, he had a lot of really strong positive things to say about all these companies. Like he called J.R. Ron a visionary, for instance, based on all the stuff he's saying on LinkedIn. And then, you know, he had a lot of really positive things to say about Compass, which I found a little awkward. Like, I do get that Compass is probably in part doing some good things, but they really creep us out for a few reasons. Yeah. And I just found it a little awkward, you know? And there's minimal critique on the drug war. I'll get this, he like, as part of some work he was doing at Harvard, was able to predict the fentanyl crisis.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
I think I remember talking about that on the podcast that we did when he was released. Yeah, really interesting.
And yeah, just like the stuff wasn't controlled, and it was relatively simple to make, and the profit margins are crazy. So of course this is going to happen. Yeah. So I thought that was really curious, and you know, he at a certain point said, "I don't know what the solution to the fentanyl crisis is." I'm like, okay, like you haven't really been part of the debate for a while, so we should let it slide for now. But like really the solution is legalize and regulate, so we have a clean, safe supply. And it's, not spending more money on tanks or like international sanctions on like China for fentanyl manufacture or something. Yeah, because it's also coming from Mexico. The economics just aren't there. Like it's too easy to start a lab and find a chemist. So, and maybe when I get a chance to talk to him, which I probably should be able to, we can have that discussion. It was just interesting to hear kind of an older head that's been around for ages have these kinds of comments about, psychedelics used to be very secret. Like LSD was a secretive thing. He said, don't tell anybody about this and we'll have some LSD one night.
Well, I wonder like what his perception is. I mean, being, well, I guess, manufacturer, right?
Alleged.
Right. Yeah. Alleged manufacturer. Sorry. Thanks for correcting me. Yeah, I mean, I guess like with that, I guess that mindset of trying to bring it to the masses, right, to some degree, being able to provide that to people, and then just thinking on like the bigger public scale with companies trying to do the same thing to some degree, right? So I wonder if there's like just the similarities there of like wanting this medicine to get to the people. And maybe seeing like, I guess if there's like the capital behind it, it starts to happen a little bit quicker and, policy change can happen. And yeah, it's just amazing. Like the, more people I talk to, especially, conservative people becoming really interested in this stuff. I just ran into somebody that, one of my dad's friends, and he was asking me what I was up to. He's like, oh man, like a friend of mine just told me about this like psychedelic stock. And, I'm just sitting there scratching my head going like, there's a lot of people starting to become really interested in this topic, and the taboo around it is starting to shift a little bit, I think. I think overall that's a good thing, right? I mean, isn't that what we're all trying to root for? Is to make some sort of policy shift and a cultural shift in the stigma around these substances. And to one degree, it seems like, bringing it to the public like this is starting to have that type of effect. And so it's a weird double-edged sword, right? It's like, this is what we want, but it's also, I guess, scary when we think about the big money coming in and people that might want to try to dominate the scene when these are some of us feel like they're very sacred. And, how do you balance that at times? So yeah, I don't know. It's double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Many kind of just, call them straight people, for example, are getting wildly interested in the stocks.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? Like this is where where people think they might be able to make some edges into their retirement that they're trying to save for.
Right.
Yeah. And, we should, this is where I love Robert Anton Wilson, because it's like to analyze something, we need to put on like 10 different lenses, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, are we doing an adequate enough job? Like looking at a scenario. So like Christine Hauskeller at the Exeter conference was really into this critical theory, which is kind of like evolved Marxism, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
And, anything that can be capitalized on will be. And she's nervous that if we make a legalize and regulate framework, that it's going to be abused and possibly manipulated to a degree where those of us with some, like a little bit of space in the underground, like really don't like that idea, So think punk rock, for instance. Like you had all this fashion, all of a sudden you can buy it at Macy's or something, or like a fancy department store. And similar to psychedelic art and culture, like it was an underground phenomenon, really obscure. Now it's like very much everywhere.
Yeah.
And, what happens when psychedelic therapy comes online and it's kind of like not a prescribable thing. So we're doing kind of like cosmetic psychiatry. Or are we doing spiritual exploration? And how can we differentiate the two? Is one safer than the other? Yeah. So Cosmetic Psychiatry. I think I heard that before. I didn't make that up.
Interesting term.
But it's, it's an interesting jam, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so I finished Saving Normal kind of recently. That's the book about the guy that was on the board, or I think the lead of the group developing DSM-4, and he was very upset with how it went. And he had some comments like that. So it's like, if we can pathologize normal, then like what's left,
Right.
And like, do pathologies really mean anything anymore? So it's a really interesting discussion. I think people should read it. He gets a lot of shit, I guess, for being a regular citation by the anti-psychiatry movement, but he's certainly not anti-psychiatry. He just wants psychiatric reform. Like, let's make sure, not only can we diagnose, but we can treat, and like things aren't that, sloppy. Like, he had a lot of great examples in the book. I won't try to do it right now, but I think folks should read that one if you want to understand like where this psychedelic path may go. But I'm optimistic because a lot of these companies are focusing on serious disorders that there's not very great treatments for. Very many great treatments for at this point. So I don't know. Like, here's another thing, Kyle. This idea of like, we hear a single story, and then we believe the narrative in the story, and we don't believe the peer-reviewed published literature to the same degree.
Right. You have an example?
So, just the endless optimism about psychedelics for healing, primarily. Or flat Earth, for instance. Like, you hear one thing, but you don't believe the rest of the data. So you've got like a confirmation bias, like cognitive dissonance built in. And it's hard for humans to shift away from this N of one thing. So for instance, like, my life has been very thrashed by COVID. People whose lives have not been very thrashed by COVID, when they want to talk about the vaccine, they're coming from a very different place than I am.
Right.
So, they're hearing N of one, like, oh, this athlete had a stroke or had a blood clot. But, after a single injection, it's like, well, was that in line with the natural, like, number for, how many people would have a stroke or a blood clot during that period of time? Right. And, we want to see that stuff on the fringes of the bell curve as normal when we're making safety decisions. Mm-hmm. But then, like, we kind of contrast that. We're like, well, these extraordinary, exceptional cases are also very interesting.
Yeah.
But that's not the point of like this part. It's like, we should respect the data and statistics, but we should also like, let's figure out what's going on these fringes. Like, can we just write it off? Or
didn't you bring this point up during Ralph's episode?
Probably. These really cool fringe cases, like, your story, for instance. Or like all of these UFO experiencers. I remember talking to one of my friends who's doing a master's, like bird stuff, ornithology maybe. And I got into it with him at one point about like these fringe psychedelic cases and how like we're not, our map of reality is minimized inappropriately when we exclude these fringe cases. And this is kind of like a riff on a William James thing of like, we have to account for all of these experiences. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're doing an incomplete job in our physics, metaphysics, etc. And, like, what does it mean that, somebody can present as psychic or present as a spirit or meet these spirits or, go to the underworld and come back in your case, and then, get set on an interesting trajectory via psychedelics. This is not what doctors can deal with, but this is what those of us outside of medicine can kind of deal with, as a philosophical, endeavor. Medicine has to deal with statistics, and it's for a good reason.
Yeah.
We have limited resources to put these things through and to help people. So we've got to make the smartest, use of our money. In large scale trials, like, 40,000 individuals getting a vaccine is a pretty good sample set. We don't have that many people through the MDMA trials yet. So Like
No,
we're
not
super
even
optimistic
close.
about the MAPS work, but some folks are really pessimistic about the vaccine. It's like, well, one has a way bigger sample set and had way more money dumped into it. So,
Well, and then it's funny. It's like vaccine, took less than a year or maybe close to a year to get, pushed through. MDMA, safety data has been around for a bit. And
Ages.
how long have they been researching this just to make sure it's like, effective and safe when it's like, wait, some of this stuff has been around for a while versus like a vaccine. So, I get confused by that too, right? It's like, wait, and I get it. We're in the middle of a pandemic and there needs to be that, push. But, one could argue that, why aren't we pushing these medicines through, even though, why aren't we using like emergency use cases for people with mental health disorders that have really got exacerbated during the pandemic, and people that are really struggling? Like, I don't know, couldn't we make a use case there for emergency use and push things through?
yeah, I think so.
And I know some doctors have.
The difference is like, go for it.
No, I was just gonna say, and I know some doctors have made that statement. We've talked about it. I think when COVID first started to happen, there were some people kind of arguing that. But yeah, I mean, the difference is that there's a global virus out that's like, taking a toll, and so I get it. Just kind of playing the other side, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, rethinking how we approach data is important. And depending on our context, the decision is, the way we approach the data should be, I guess, context dependent. Unless we're trying to do a very multifaceted analysis and like provide a very detailed, broken out thing of like, there's these 20 implications here of this study. That was one of the things I always got hung up on in my undergrad in philosophy. Is like, okay, like if all this is true, what are the implications of this? And nobody could really like lay that out for me. And it really was kind of bothered me a lot. For instance, we spent a lot of time talking about, meditation, mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. And, psychedelic stuff too. So, I spent a lot of time in this, edge case kind of parapsychology type stuff, paranormal stuff. And, some of it's really well documented, as we got into in the Ralph episode. Some of it not so much. So,
Yeah.
What are the rules of evidence of these extraordinary claims?
Yeah.
Like, like my friend that was, had his psoriasis cleared up in the jungle, because of his time with ayahuasca shamans. Like, well, was it ayahuasca? And he's like, well, they did a lot to me. And they had me change my diet radically.
Right. And then you throw in all these different variables. And it's like, what's what at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you tease it apart and make sense of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump to this next one. Porta Sophia. So thanks everybody at Porta Sophia for doing what you do. You can donate there. There's a number of partners. I guess let's look at that real quick. Yeah. USONA, Casimir Jones, Wisconsin School of Pharmacy, American Institute of History of Pharmacy, Betsy Gordon Psychoactive Substance Research Collective at Purdue. Forgot that was at Purdue. DMT Nexus and Bluelight.org. Awesome. Had some great
Bluelight's
partners
still
there.
around? Nice.
Yeah, Bluelight. Yeah, it's been around for ages. I remember sitting on... I found out about Bluelight in New York City at the first Horizons I went to, and it was while Sasha Shulgin was there with his wife, and they were filming for Dirty Pictures. There's these cuts in Dirty Pictures where he's in front of the Judson Church on the steps, and I was just on the other side going, oh, that's fucking awesome that Sasha's right there. And I'm talking to this wild dude, like, telling me all about Bluelight. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I've been on these drug forums for a few years now, man, and, like, I never heard of Bluelight. So I'm mostly on, like, DMT Nexus, Shroomery, Mycotopia, I think the Grow Report. And I was like, wait, what? Like, there's a forum I don't even know about? So it was just kind of blew my mind.
Wasn't MAPS kind of behind Bluelight, or they had a play in it?
I think they had a sub-forum inside Bluelight,
okay,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
And, I I was interested in MAPS, but they seemed like a much smaller player back then, like 2008-9. I was more interested in like the culture that people were actually growing and could talk about it, all that kind of stuff. At that point in history. Now I'm, much more interested in what MAPS is up to.
Yeah.
Lenny helped for sure. He was definitely pushing it. It's like, this is a big deal. It's like, well, yeah, you're right. Probably should have been paying attention since 2003 when you started talking to me about it, Lenny. Anyway, all right, marijuana moment.
Takes a while to sink in.
So big moves in drum roll. There's a drum roll button here. I need to learn how to use it. But Texas lawmakers approve marijuana and psychedelics reform bills. So Kyle Yeager at Marijuana Moment put this out on the 27th, so yesterday, and it's pretty exciting. The House of Reps Tuesday approved a bill to reduce penalties for possession of marijuana concentrates, and lawmakers separately advanced legislations to require studies on the therapeutic potential of certain psychedelics for military veterans. I thought that was a really interesting thing. I remember at one point in the article they were saying like this is for veterans only. And like given it being Texas and there's a lot of veterans in Texas, like it's a really interesting play.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have any
interesting takeaways? And I think they limited it to just vets with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so they limited it to a diagnosis. So that's what they're looking at. I thought it was interesting that this marijuana bill only included concentrates. And so I was kind of curious, like, what's going on there? Like, why is like flower not available there? It says, this concentrates measure would make it so possessions up to 2 ounces of those products would be downgraded to a Class B misdemeanor. And I wonder, like, what
concentrate is a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. And they don't have anything for like decriminalization. It sounded like they had something in the past for decriminalization, and it didn't get approved.
So here's this: up to an ounce of marijuana will be a Class C misdemeanor that carries a fine but no threat of jail time. Up to an ounce. So that's, they're saying marijuana, so they probably mean flower, not concentrate in that particular part.
Right.
Yeah, that THC cap from 0.5% to 5% was interesting. I don't really understand that, but things are coming. It sounds like NORML is really active there, which is awesome. Yeah. And, like as the medical, benefits of cannabis come forward and get more established, or a lawmaker in Texas, for instance, which I think was the case in this article, had a family member who is helped to an extraordinary degree by cannabis, that's when I think things begin to shift and evolve. Usually they'd rather make their money from putting people in jail than making cannabis products available. So, not to be too cynical, but a lot of the politicians are in the mix and investors in these private prison funds. It's horrifying that there's a fund for private prisons. Yeah, and there's something here about quarterly reports and like a final report in 2024. So the Health and Human Services Commission would have to submit quarterly reports on their progress around the psychedelic project, with a full report of the panel's findings due by December 2024. So that's, feels far away, but it's not that far off, right? Like it seems like they're going to fund this project so they can have their own kind of statewide research initiative. And the political stance here, Texas is wildly interesting for those who don't know, terrifying sometimes, but wildly interesting in that they take a really strong stance for state rights, which allows for this American experiment to do some really interesting things. Like Oregon, for instance, is doing a federally illegal thing based on the states' rights idea that, states are kind of like their own country in a sense, but they've got some mutually agreed upon rules at the federal level. Well, agreed upon is a funny term, but sometimes they want to comply, sometimes they don't. And this allows for a lot more experimentation than a single country with like a single monolithic government like Canada. Though
Yeah.
Canada's got some really interesting things happening, like Therasil too. So there's angles and there's room. So we just have to get creative and try a lot. Probably got to fail a lot.
I was watching a documentary about why a lot of companies are moving to Texas for the freedom that you're talking about with state rights, just like the flexibility to do certain things that a lot of companies possibly couldn't do in California. Also the taxes too, obviously. California's wildly expensive. But yeah, I thought that was interesting to hear about those state rights and kind of like the flexibility that it offers for certain companies and things to do certain things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's a precarious state. Like I talked about the water knife book a while back, and if the weather patterns change substantially, are there enough aquifers and water on hand to help Texas survive? I hope so.
Yeah.
I know in Phoenix, it's like the Arizona water rights are insane. Like there's a lot of fraud going on and like water prediction and like, we're going to do fine. Except they just keep watering golf courses in Arizona, which seems insane to me. And, no real foresight, like what happens in 10 years when we have a crazy drought in Colorado and the rest of the world, the rest of the Colorado River basin doesn't have what it needs. Does Arizona get cut off? How hurt is Texas going to be? And what happens? Like, do people have to migrate if they can't get water? Like, if Nestle is their only source of water, like, perhaps they're going to have to leave. So I'm a little less pessimistic about Texas, but I do think Texas could be really hurt by these substantial droughts. Otherwise, it makes sense. Like, you don't need to heat your house all the time, though AC might be necessary. Anyway, it's probably enough on Texas on that angle.
Yeah. But it's exciting. I mean, it'll be cool to see what studies they'll be able to do. It looks like they'll be examining psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine, and just to be able to get the data on that, I think will be huge, just for the movement in general, right? Because, more data, right? We need it. So hopefully that passes. Fingers crossed that they'll be able to do that.
So I recorded yesterday with Franklin King, MD, friend of ours, who's attached to Mass General Hospital's new psychedelic research group, and another psychiatrist at Mass General, Fernando S.B. Farzan. And he's actually got a major psychedelic podcast in Spanish, which is neat.
No way. Cool.
And he's got great numbers in Latin America, in Spanish, U.S. as well. So I think that's really great. And we had some really great stuff from them. I think we'll bump a few podcasts and insert them sooner than later, because it's kind of topical and timely. And I asked them as medical doctors what their impression was of the stuff in Oregon. And they're like, well, as medical doctor, I would like urge caution. And if someone had like an acute diagnosis, that you should probably get at least screened by a physician, and be really careful and go to a more clinical environment than maybe one more. It's a little more like I guess we'll call it just non-clinical. I don't want to describe things, but stuff that's a little non-standard. Yeah. So maybe go to like the one that looks more like Hopkins than the one that looks more like what you and I personally might fantasize more about creating. And I'm like, it kind of makes sense. I threw in that, someone should probably go to talk therapy a bunch first too, if they can make it work. But we'll see. I heard Oregon just is still working on developing their training team roster. Mm-hmm. So like who's going to be providing input to the state for what the training needs to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how all that develops.
Right. Yeah. So, but it's just a great.
It's always so hard, right? When we get these questions of like, how do I get involved? Like, what's going on? And it's like, man, I don't know. Like, what's going to happen in Oregon? What's going to happen here? Hawaii and Florida are looking at similar initiatives and bills. I mean, yeah, it's like for a long time it was only like down this clinical route, and now these other potential options may be opening up and allowing people maybe without the clinical background to participate, right? So yeah, it's evolving so rapidly and hard to predict the future all the time, right?
Yeah, like how can we? Like we understand kind of like what happens generally speaking with capital. There's definitely positives, there's definitely negatives. Hopefully, with this broad experimentation across the US, we've got these companies doing their FDA thing, we've got some states experimenting. We've also got Jamaica and Netherlands going. It's really interesting. I'm excited about the diversity of applications. I'm really excited about Omar Thomas's Diaspora Psychedelic Society. And listeners, this doesn't count as an endorsement. I haven't been there yet, but his approach looks really cool about healing people in Jamaica, training people in Jamaica. Like why should Jamaica have to necessarily import therapists from the United States or Canada or Europe when they've got a pretty big population already with a decent education? Like a lot of Jamaicans have a really great education. A lot of families push really hard to get people into like great schools in Jamaica and elsewhere outside the country. So get some really bright people there. And it would be just really amazing to see what happens when it kind of shifts from like treating largely rich white people to like, let's treat this particular culture. How cheap can we make it for these people? Is it okay to use mushrooms instead of lab produced molecules? Yes is my answer, but I get why people want a straight molecule. Yeah. Cool. So,
Louisiana, right? So on marijuana moment and staying on the marijuana trend, the governor of Louisiana, I guess just advanced a bill for legalization, or has great interest in the bill. Another southern state moving towards that. What was that? Virginia was the first southern state to pass legalization. So it's cool to see the South pick up on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Things don't always move as quickly down there. It's fine. Like you got to catch up eventually, and they do. So it's really nice to see this. I think they see the logic of doing this, like racial disparities in sentencing in Louisiana are horrifying. Same with Texas. So, this is a move in that direction, though I would note that they can't necessarily lead with that kind of discussion in those states,
right?
Because they might lose some votes. Racism is alive and well in some of those states still. Well, everywhere really, but it's it can be really explicit in the South. So they don't necessarily want to hear about racial sentencing disparities. Like that guy in Texas that got many years for a gram joint recently. Do you remember when I brought up the Dubai situation? This guy went to Dubai. He had a like appendicitis, I think, and needed to be hospitalized. He tested positive. This guy that was in California and was just traveling to Dubai for some reason tested positive for cannabis in his blood, and he was detained in his hotel room awaiting trial for a long time.
Really?
And it was looking like he could face multiple years incarceration in Dubai. They eventually sent him back, so that's the update. So they sent him out, and thankfully he's no longer incarcerated there.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. This is 2-3 weeks back, maybe. And the update, I think, just came in like late last week. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, if you're going to Dubai, be careful.
Yes, some countries still have very intense drug laws. So, be careful.
Right. Yeah, and just in general, be careful. Like, we're really optimistic about this psychedelic movement, but how do you avoid going to prison? You should be really explicitly careful when you can be.
Yeah. I found an article just in terms of like legalization, decriminalization. A Santa Cruz man got 10 years in federal prison for selling psychedelic drugs at college. he pleaded guilty for selling LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, and MDMA. So, LSD and MDMA weren't part of the plant medicine decriminalization, and obviously selling isn't part of that. But, I think it's just a reminder, right? Santa Cruz, you might think, oh, they've decriminalized plant medicines. Maybe I could get away with selling some mushrooms or doing that. But yeah, as we always say, decriminalization isn't legalization, right? So, could still get in trouble there. And obviously there was more to the story there, but, just an example, right? We can be really optimistic and maybe want to push forward in different ways. And, if your risk tolerance is high like that, hey, I guess you're going to do what you're going to do. But, just realize that the law is the law still, and we still have a lot of progress to be made when it comes to this.
Right. Yeah, we've got a long way to go, and yeah, I hope we find a great way forward here. At times it gets quite scary, but have some faith. I'm optimistic that millennials are going to be a lot more rational than a lot of us older generations. Like as I develop arthritis in my hands and elsewhere, I'm like, okay, like you guys are actually pretty smart. Like I might have thought your culture is a little weird, but like a little bit too much TikTok once in a while. But things are like the values are evolving. Stuff that older generations valued are just falling away. Like how many younger folks are just going like, why would I get a car? I can just get a Lyft, or Uber or whatever.
Yeah.
So like,
it was really interesting. Like really interesting working with like teenagers years ago and just seeing like, I wasn't even like that old, I think I started working in residential when I was 25, but just even noticing like the generational differences there and just hearing how they're approaching things and the things that they were like, really into social justice issues. And I was like, man, I definitely was not thinking about this stuff when I was like 15 or, whatever age. I mean, to some degree, but I just feel like, this generation is those generations are exposed to so much more than maybe we were. The internet, I mean, I can't even remember. I think I got a smartphone definitely when I was at high school at that point. And, a lot of these kids have smartphones at very young ages and access to so much stuff at their fingertips. They don't remember the days of the the dial-up modem and maybe one computer in the house and having to share it and this and that.
Yeah. So culture is evolving. We're part of it. The youth often accelerate the culture change far more than people over 30 can. So thank you all for playing a part. It's going to be a really weird ride. There's going to be so many bumps in the road. There's going to be some fights. Stuff's going to get heated here and there. So let's just try our best to keep an even head when we can. Yeah, I know it's not always easy, but I think we can do it.
Yeah.
Cool.
We have to do it.
Yep. Well, the consequences are quite dire if we do not.
Yeah.
So, all right. Kyle, anything else you want to jump into?
Let's see. There was another article. This is on SciTech Daily. Scientists discover a psychedelic-like drug without hallucinogenic side effects. So just, interesting that they're continuing to explore those drugs. The one thing I thought was interesting from this article, it was published in Cell, April 28th. But they have developed a genetically encoded fluorescent sensor called psychLight that can screen for hallucinogenic potential by indicating when a compound activates the serotonin 2A receptor. I thought that was really interesting, like technology to figure out what compounds are like interacting there, and how to, for drug development. I'm sure they have that stuff, but I don't know. I don't work in a lab or understand that. So when I read that, I was like, oh, sounds pretty interesting.
Well, that paired with AI
Yeah.
could be some really interesting stuff. And I know some companies are doing that AI stuff for new drug research, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot more drugs available.
Yeah.
Which, this is back to that. Well, my drug policy comment would be, when things get prohibited, more dangerous alternatives come to the table. Like the spice, the K2 thing is a great example of that. And, when prohibition of alcohol happened, hard liquor sales went crazy, and beer not so much because it wasn't as much kick per, gram. So was it the iron law of prohibition? Fentanyl, same thing. Like fentanyl's far more valuable and interesting to a lot of drug dealers, traffickers, cartels, etc., based on the price per gram. Like your value per cubic foot and weight measure is like, way higher. So yeah, as these new drugs come to market and things aren't yet regulated, or, we've got some loosey-goosey regulations somewhere, but not elsewhere, these novel drugs are going to come in and people are going to use them in the underground, in illegal settings, and people will be hurt because, some of these drugs aren't going to be as safe as LSD, psilocybin, MDMA.
Yep.
If we had a safe, regulated MDMA supply, LSD and psilocybin supply, how many people are going to fringe out and like experiment with these research chemicals, or these things that people think are acid, when it's acid for a lot of drug dealers is a catch-all term for a 2,5-IN bomb and other weirdo research chemicals that are potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and I wonder with like, just new drug development, just thinking about like long-term studies and data where it's like, yeah, some of these new compounds, like I guess it's exciting, and, you always say we need new drugs, but it's like, I guess if we don't even have the ones that we have like a history of use, and they're not being like the application there to study even more in depth, like, I don't know. Why is there a race for new drugs when we're not even using the ones to their full potential that are, not even on the market right now? So that's what I think about too. I mean, obviously for this non-hallucinogenic one, their quote here was, one of the problems with psychedelic therapies is that they require close guidance and supervision from a medical team. A drug that doesn't cause hallucinations could be taken home. So, I get it from that perspective, but, yeah, just thinking about all the new companies coming online, trying to just find new drugs for patents and development, when it's like, have we really explored the potential of, the ones that have been around for a while? Like, yeah, LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, even all the Shulgin compounds, right? I mean, has there been any clinical research on like 2CB yet? I don't know.
I think somebody is working on it. I forget who it is offhand. Can't wait. Yeah. I'd love to get me some cheaper 2CB. It's so expensive here. Just a quick Google. I can't see if anybody's researching it, but I do recall. I'm interested in the other 2C compounds, but I'm like, I think 2CB might be the safest, but that also could be very wild speculation. So sorry, everybody. But yeah, please do research 2CB. Chemists, there's a 2CB shortage. Chemists, there's also a synthetic mescaline shortage. So please help. Yeah. All right. Anything else, Kyle?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, we're at an hour. We got to wrap up here.
Cool.
So, yeah, thanks, Joe.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, Kyle. Check out our course offerings at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Kyle's got this serotonergic class coming up with Dr. Melanie Pincus, neuroscientist. It's a great resume, by the way. I finally looked up her LinkedIn. I was kind of shocked. And really excited we get to work with Dr. Melanie Pincus. And Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists kicks off May 20. Seats are selling out. It will sell out. So if you want to secure your spot, come on down. psychedeliceducationcenter.com to learn more. All right. I think that's it for now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kyle. And we'll see you all in the next episode.